This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Rise up! Team Rise! Rise up! Team Rise!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And we continue with our opponent preview series. And in this edition of the show, one of the 14 Cardinals opponents are the Cincinnati Bengals, whom they will face on the road in Week 17. One of a tough game down the stretch in that 6-game stretch where they play four games against division winners and 2 games against teams that were in the mix for the playoffs down to the final week, and that include the Bengals, who went 9-8. And joining me for the second year in a row, although in a different role, is Billy Riccette, who is one of the contributing writers over at the Bengals Wire. Last year, he joined me on this show to talk about the Jets and Aaron Rodgers and all that stuff. But now he's got a different hat on. Billy Riccette from Bengals Wire and Jets Wire. Billy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Jess. Glad to be chatting with you again, man. Great to see you.
So tell me about the Bengals from last season. They finished 9-8. They missed the playoffs, and we can probably point to that beginning of the year where it kind of set them back. Because if anything, Week 1, when they lost to the New England Patriots 16-10, then they had a 1-point loss to the Chiefs, a 38-33 loss to the Commanders. And that kind of put them behind the 8 ball. And even though they won 5 straight down the stretch, it wasn't enough to make the postseason. And I know Bengals fans got really, really, really bent out of shape that the Chiefs arrested everybody in Week 18 against the Broncos. But I mean, what was the good? Just how good was Joe Burrow, and how bad was the defense last season?
Yeah, that's the big thing there, and you're right. It really the start of the season really set them back. I mean, losing to the Patriots, which obviously looking back, we know that ended up being a really bad loss. Not just for the fact that the Patriots only won 4 games last season. Ultimately, you think back. I know, small sample size. It's only 17 games. You play the what if game, but man, you really think they go back and win that game. They get 10 wins. They have the tiebreaker with the Broncos, beat them in overtime, Week 17, probably find themselves in the playoffs. And this was a team that we were talking about last few weeks of the season as a team that nobody really wanted to face, because you mentioned they had the 5-game winning streak at the end of the season. They were really starting things were really starting to click, but ultimately they just dug themselves too much of a hole. They were 4-8 at one point after losing what was a bit of a shootout. 44-38 against the Steelers in Week 13. But yeah, like you said, Joe Burrow, just absolutely incredible. Honestly, he had legit MVP talk. Obviously, I think the only thing that really hurt him last season in his MVP case was the fact that the Bengals only won 9 games. I mean, the guy threw for almost 5,000 yards. He had 43 touchdowns, almost 9 interceptions. I completely over the injury problem that he had in 2023. So Burrow just once again showed that he is one of the elite quarterbacks. Some argue he's number 2 in the league behind Patrick Mahomes. There's, obviously that big debate, him and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, but it's just incredible really to watch all 3. But Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those are really the 3 guys, obviously, that kept this offense going as they always do. And once again, it was a year where they had to do it with not great offensive line help. And really the running game wasn't all that impactful either. You look back at some of the numbers, they only had 1 game last season in which they had a 100-yard rusher. Brown had a $120 against the Raiders in week 9. Now he was close a couple times too late in the season. He had 97 against the Titans in week 15, 91 against the Browns in week 16, but 1 game with a 100-yard rusher. But like you said too, the defense, that was really the biggest culprit. I mean, it obviously helped. They had Trey Hendrickson, who was far and away, I think, the best player on that defense. Injuries certainly hurt them too. Losing Logan Wilson was a big blow. But other than that, they really struggled to rush the passer. They were actually one of the worst teams. They were bottom 10, I believe, in rush in sacks on opposing quarterbacks. They had about 34 sacks, and half of that was just one player with Trey Hendrickson, and we'll obviously touch on him in a little bit because we know he's been making some headlines. But yeah, it boils down to this. Offense was great. Defense was not so great. There were too many times where, I mean, you look at the week 10 game against Baltimore. I think that kind of summed up the season. 428 passing yards for Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase goes for 264. They score 34 points, and they give up 35. That, I think, was kind of the Bengals season in a nutshell. That loss dropped them to 4-6. Again, they ended up getting to 4-5 at some point. The number of times that they scored 25, 30 points and still lost is astonishing. And that really summed up, I think that kind of nicely sums up the 2024 Bengals, who are now, 2 years in a row missing the playoffs after all those deep playoff runs.
And what's interesting is that Burrow carried, and you look at their losses, and I get, like, if you look at their losses, it kind of makes sense why they missed the postseason, because of their 8 losses, 6 of them were to playoff teams. In fact, they went 1-6 against playoff teams, with their only win coming in week 17 when they beat the Broncos 30-24 in overtime. And so they were an elite offensive team and a bad defensive team, making them, like, by the numbers, a mediocre team. The Cardinals were kind of in that same boat last year without the elite quarterback play. They finished 8-9. They had one bad loss, like the Bengals lost to the Patriots, bad loss. The Cardinals lost to the Panthers last year. That was their bad loss. And had they won that game and split the Seahawks games, they would have been in the postseason. But other than that, they lost to playoff teams and they beat non-playoff teams. And that's kind of like the season that the Bengals had. So what changed defensively? Because everyone raved about Lou Anarumo, and that's one of the changes that we made in the offseason. Everyone raved about Lou Anarumo. What happened to that defense? Was it scheme or was it personnel?
I think it's a little bit of both, because you have all the, you certainly have all these young guys that you're still trying to develop. One of the big things too certainly is, you're banking on some of these young cornerbacks that you haven't really hit on, but there's still something there that you're hoping could pop out. You're still hoping for something out of, what are you going to get at a Dax Hill? Can Cam Taylor Britt, take that next step? DJ Turner at the other corner position. that's really kind of what you're hoping for. I think now that you have a new defense coordinator in Al Golden coming over from Notre Dame, you have a guy now that obviously is used to developing younger guys. He spent all that time at Notre Dame now, so he has the experience of working with younger guys, developing them. And I think that's going to be good for the Bengals here. It might be a little bit more of a simpler scheme, and it's a fresh start, especially for both sides. Lou Anarumo now in Indianapolis, but I think that's kind of the key is that back end that was a little bit of an issue. These guys are still developing. You're still trying to find, because they've obviously taken so many stabs in the secondary over the last couple of drafts. Getting hit guys like Hill, Taylor Britt, DJ Ivey, Josh Newton, all these guys. So really going to be interesting to see how those guys develop this season under Al Golden. And then linebacker is another position too that's going to be interesting because they definitely remade that room as well. They released Jermaine Pratt, who, if I remember, I believe he signed with the Raiders. They actually drafted 2 linebackers this year. You had Bear Carter, first it was Demetrius Knight, the kid out of South Carolina in the second round, who was widely expected to start opposite Logan Wilson there in the middle. And then you have Bear Carter, the kid out of Clemson they took in the 4th round. So really going to be interesting to see that linebacker spot. And then, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit too, the defensive ends. That's where, again, that was the biggest issue. I think, bringing a guy like Al Golden, see what you can get out of some of these. Well, right now it's some of these free agent signings, which we'll touch to, because the 2 quote unquote big guys that they're supposedly relying on are nowhere to be found.
Yeah, we'll definitely hit on that. So, as we look at last season, how do you have such a dominant pass rusher? He led the league, 17.5 sacks, he had 36 quarterback hits, 19 tackles for loss. He's a first-team All-Pro. He's second in Defensive Player of the Year. How is that defense not better?
That's a great question. This isn't something you see every year, is it? You have a stud. I mean, even like the Browns defense, you at least have guys where, they're kind of contributing and helping out Myles Garrett. The Bengals just didn't really have anybody. And that was kind of the biggest thing where
they got to the passer. They got interceptions.
Finish. Correct.
But they were terrible against the run. And below average against the pass. They were 30th in yards. They were 20th in yards per attempt, but they were good at getting interceptions and getting their hands on balls. But it's just very interesting to see how that defense played out. How you could have arguably the best defensive player in the league, and to be a abjectly bad defensive team overall. And to be goes so good offensively, where they're a top 10 team in yards. They're 6th in points. You've got the best quarterback numbers. He's 43. He's got, it's not quite the lowest interception. Not only is he scoring points at a higher rate, he's not turning the ball over, and yet he was sacked 48 times. And with all that, he had 2 game-winning drives in a 4th quarter comeback. It's just what a weird year for the Bengals. It just seems, and it reminds me of the Cardinals from back in 2016. Now, they didn't fall into an 0-3, but do you think that losing those first 3 games kind of put them behind the 8 ball to where it was just nearly impossible to get back?
Oh, absolutely, because it was another year of, they start 0-2. That was kind of because what are we at? 4 years in a row, I think they've started 0-2. And then, like you said, they actually ended up starting 0-3. You mentioned the run game. I remember watching, even going back to that week 1 game against the Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson just went absolutely wild in that game. They just could not stop him worth the lick, and that was one of the biggest reasons why they dropped that first game, only scored. And it's amazing looking at how good that offense was that they only scored 10 points against the Patriots, and that ended up being not a good defense at all. But absolutely, the 0-3 start, especially in the division like that, when you know you're already having to play catch up to the Ravens, the Steelers are always going to be a tough task. That absolutely, I think, not completely took the wind out of the sails, but it definitely dug them quite a hole that they had to climb out of. And then you get to 1-4, and then mentioned before that Steelers loss where they gave up 44 points, dropped them to 4-8, and looking back, ultimately that just ended up being too big of a hole to climb out of. They nearly did, of course. They won 5 straight, got to 9-8. They were 1 game out, but you look back, even that Steelers loss that dropped them to 4-8. You win that game, probably end up overtaking the Steelers for one of those playoff spots as well. So a lot of key losses to playoff teams down the stretch, like the Steelers, like the Chargers, that really, really damaged the season.
Coming up next on the Res of Zero podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to off-season moves, free agency, and the draft. That's coming up next on Res of Red.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
We're back in the Res of Zero podcast, best hour Cardinals talk on the web, talking to Billy Riccette, one of the contributing writers over at the Bengals Wire. Already alluded to a few changes that happened. They let Lou Anarumo go, and they hired Al Golden, who, ironically enough, was part of the Bengals staff just a few years ago as a linebackers coach. But he returns, but they've also made some changes. So some of the key losses. So they released Alex Kappa, veteran guard, Akeem Davis-Gaither, who started the last 7 games of the year for the Bengals at linebacker after Logan Wilson gets hurt. He comes to Arizona. Sam Hubbard retires. Jermaine Pratt was released. Sheldon Rankins was released. Was there anyone that you would consider an impact loss from the guys they either released or let go in free agency?
It's interesting because, you mentioned the Alex Kappa release, but guard is still kind of a big question mark. Not that Kappa was fantastic, but at least he's still kind of sort of solidified. Akeem Davis-Gaither, though, is probably a guy that I thought was really a nice I think he's going to be a really good addition for the Cardinals because he's a guy that can come in, be a good spot starter. You mentioned he started after Logan Wilson, did a nice job filling in for Logan Wilson. I even remember watching him at the Senior Bowl, being one of those kind of nice up and coming guys. So he's definitely a nice depth guy that can really add some pop, I think, to that defense. So not necessarily so many impact players, but definitely some quality depth players, I think, that were among them. But they did a nice job kind of filling some of those voids.
They did bring back guys. So they re-signed tight end Mike Gesicki. After franchising T. Higgins, they give him a monster deal. Jamar Chase gets the big deal. They bring back BJ Hill, 3 years, $33 million. And then of course, the part that is tough is that Trey Hendrickson wants a new deal, and they have not come to do that. Now, of the players that they added linebacker Oren Burks, who played for the 49ers previously and the Eagles, Joe Giles Harris, Samaje Perine, running back for the Chiefs, TJ Slayton, defensive tackle. Any of those guys expected to make an impact or are expected to be major contributors this year?
Yeah, I think you could definitely see TJ Slayton working in there with BJ Hill. So, I mean, there's two, one being brought back, one through free agency. Those right now are probably your two starting defensive tackles, especially for a group that is going to need all the help they can get up front. So I think TJ Slayton, at least in terms of the new guys, I think you're going to see him get some quality snaps. I think he's going to work well with BJ Hill. Among the guys that they were able to retain, Joseph Asai, I think, is going to be really fascinating to watch because this was a guy who was actually the second leading sacker last season. We talked about, the small number of sacks that the Bengals had. Asai was the only other Bengal player with more than 3 sacks, which was crazy. He had 5 sacks, and then BJ Hill and Chris Jenkins each had 3. Nobody else had more than 2. So with Hendrickson, in his contract issue, Shamar Stewart, his contract issue, Joseph Asai, I think, is going to be a guy that could be in for a bigger role. They gave him kind of a 1-year prove-it deal, seeing if he can continue to grow, especially, with a new defense coordinator. But yeah, between him and Slayton, as far as free agency, those are definitely two guys that I think could end up really growing in this season in that defense.
So Trey Hendrickson, he's entering the final year of his deal. There's no guaranteed money. He's due to make $15.8 million. He is 31 years old. What is the sticking point here between the Bengals and Hendrickson? Is it the amount of money? It is how long? Is it the amount of guaranteed money? What has Hendrickson so upset?
Yeah, I think at this point he just wants a pretty hefty pay raise. He's only set to make about $16 million this season in the final year. And obviously you're seeing these new pass rush deals, $35-40 million. Not saying he's going to get Myles Garrett money, obviously, or whatever Micah Parsons is going to end up getting. But I think he has a valid argument to get $30+ million maybe a year. Like I said, he is 31 years old, but he is coming off being the sack leader last season with 17.5. And when you have a player that has 12.5 more sacks than any other player on his own team, especially going into the final year of a contract, I think that right there is worth saying, hey, like, I'm your guy. I'm pretty far and away one of, if not the best player on this defense. I'm one of the few reasons you guys even had somewhat of a semblance of a defense. And $16 million at this point in today's NFL world feels very small for a top tier pass rusher. So that really, I think, is the big thing. I think he just, certainly wants a lot more than $16 million. So that's going to be really fascinating to see. Hopefully, for their sake, something happens in the next couple weeks before training camp, but we'll see.
And that leads to the draft, where you have another contract issue. But let's start with who they got in the draft this year. And it starts off with pass rusher Shamar Stewart in round 1. They get linebacker Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina in round 2. You made a reference to that. Offensive lineman Dylan Fairchild out of Georgia. Barrett Carter, linebacker out of Clemson. Jalen Rivers, offensive lineman out of Miami. And then Taj Brooks, running back out of Texas Tech. Shamar Stewart is like, is he supposed to be in a way? Was this the Bengals signaling to Hendrickson, hey, we're planning on moving on from you?
In a way, it could have been, but in a way, it was also like they just needed something opposite.
Yes.
Trey Hendrickson. We talked about Joseph Asai, but even after that, do they still have hope for a guy like Miles Murphy, their former first-round pick? Do they have hope that he can break out? Or, he's been kind of treading water a little bit too. But yeah, this I think was just a case of they just desperately needed more help in getting the pass rusher. And I get it. The small number of sacks from Shamar Stewart. I get it. We heard it all throughout the draft process. But you also have to understand the scheme he was playing in, what he was asked to do was not necessarily designed for him to rack up a lot of sacks. He's playing inside the tackle, playing a lot of 4-eye. That's not always going to get you 10 to 12 sacks a year, even in a conference, even in the big level that he's playing at. He's just doing the game. He's just doing what he's coached to do. He was such a fascinating case of stats versus film, right? That was the big thing. There's a lot of potential there. The production wasn't there. I get it. But I think with development, I think he could turn out to be pretty special. Fortunately, obviously, he has not had any development because of the contract issue, which is why he hasn't had any minicamp time. Don't know what's going to happen with training camp. This is going to be fascinating to watch.
Well, and it's interesting because the report is that the money's not the issue because rookie contracts are pretty much set and slotted, and he's going to get a fully guaranteed deal.
Correct.
The sticking point is the verbiage in the deal, is there the clause that now I've seen some of the Arizona Cardinals contracts, and they do have that language where ways that it will void guarantees, like if they get fined. And apparently, isn't it the case that the Bengals have not traditionally included such verbiage, but want to start now? Mm-hmm. And Stewart's representation is like, hey, why are you starting with us?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not going to do this. You need to make this but it's standard around the league. It's not standard for you. And also, the language can be vague so that, like, if a player is fined for whatever reason, it could be interpreted that would void guarantee. So that whether that be, uniform violations or things like that. And so a balance of the agent saying, hey, you're not starting this with my client. Mm-hmm. And or two, you need to define this much better. What specific acts will violate the contract and then void the guarantees? The Bengals, the Cardinals, are in this boat as well. The Bengals and the Cardinals are both known as franchises that are not run particularly well, and with ownership that will do some questionable things in terms of money. Is this gonna get resolved? Is he ultimately going to sign? Are the Bengals going to cave on the verbiage, or is he just going to what's going to happen here? What do you think?
I think ultimately this gets done. The Bengals, they have to figure out something. They have to know that they need the pass rush help on the field, and like you said, that they've done this before with this kind of they just did it recently with Amarius Mims. So Stewart's just looking for a contract similar to him, or a guy like Dallas Turner last year. I think ultimately, we saw they were able to work something out with Jamar Chase, and probably even more importantly, work something out with T. Higgins. There was certainly a lot of questions that what was going to happen there. They ultimately worked that out. I think ultimately they work out something with Trey Hendrickson as well. But yeah, I think ultimately this does get done with Shamar Stewart. And ideally within the next week or so, because training camp is coming soon. And like I said before, this is a guy that, yes, he has potential, but he needs development too, because he's got to show that, hey, he can get more than 4.5 sacks in 3 years. He's probably one of the first round picks, even with the potential he does. He's a guy that probably needs practice reps more than a lot of other first round picks here. So yeah, ultimately I think this gets done, and hopefully it's not too long, if any, of a training camp holdout.
So Stewart is supposed to make an impact this year. Whether he does or not, we'll have to wait and see.
Right,
with all the missed time. Who else of the draft class is expected to? Is Demetrius Knight expected to be? Is Dylan Fairchild expected to start? Who of that draft class is expected to have either some sort of role, whether significant or minor, in 2025?
Honestly, I think both of them that you just mentioned. We alluded to it before. I think Demetrius Knight is likely going to start opposite Logan Wilson at the will linebacker spot. And really, he's basically going to take over that Jermaine Pratt role and hopefully be a lot better than Jermaine Pratt, because Pratt struggled pretty often throughout last season. So I think getting a fresh, quicker face in there in Knight, I think is going to be really fun to watch. I think you're going to quietly have a pretty good combo there with Knight and Wilson. And then you mentioned Dylan Fairchild, the third-round pick. I think he's absolutely at least going to compete for one of those guard spots. I mean, they've got to figure out something there, because we talked about last season. That was another sticking point with, how amazing it was that Joe Burrow had the season he had, because once again, his offensive line was not good, and they really didn't do much to really attack it. I mean, you bring in Lucas Patrick as a free agent from the Saints, but then Fairchild really is kind of the only other big addition. He'll likely compete with former 4th-round pick Cordell Volson. But ultimately, yeah, I think, if it's not week 1, I think at some point during the season you may see Fairchild starting at left guard. So yeah, both of those guys I think absolutely can make an impact early on out of this draft class.
And Carter, Rivers, Brooks, are they expected depth, special teams, developmental type players? What's the plan for them?
Yeah, I think they're depth guys right now. Rivers, he'll be one of the backup tackles. He could be a swing tackle behind Orlando Brown and Amarius Mims. Bear Carter should add some special teams. He'll likely be Logan Wilson's backup early on. And then you mentioned Taj Brooks. He'll be kind of in the mix there a little bit, but I'm not expecting too much out of him. Maybe he sees the field a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see how they mix him in behind Brown and Moss. So, yeah, those guys I think are more kind of quality depth pieces that certainly have the chance to develop and see some more playing time. Maybe not necessarily this year. Maybe not necessarily this year, but down the line here.
Coming up next to the Res of Seaward podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and discuss the 2020-25 season for Cincinnati. That's coming up next on Rise Up Seaward.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
We're back on the Rise of Seaward podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm talking to Billy Riccette, contributing writer over at the Bengals Wire, as we look at the Cincinnati Bengals in our opponent preview series. The Bengals expected, well, this year, if you look at their schedule, they have a good shot of not starting 0-2. because they opened the season against the Browns, followed by the Jaguars. And the Jaguars are a question mark, but if they open up on the road losing to the Browns, I don't know what Bengals fans are going to do. However, that is immediately followed up with 4 straight weeks against teams who are in the postseason. 3 of those on the road against Minnesota, on the road against Denver, at home against Detroit, and on the road against Green Bay. That's a tough start to the year after a couple of very winnable games. Then they hit a really, really tough schedule. How does the schedule look for them this year? How does it play out for them?
Oh yeah, it's very tough, like you said, and actually you could even add Pittsburgh into that mix too. Excuse me, the Thursday night game, Week 7. So that's 5 straight playoffs. So even tougher. But man, if they lose to Cleveland Week 1, the next week is their home opener against the Jags. The number of signs and chants that'll say fire Zach Taylor would be astronomical. I think there's people that already have him on the chop. I mean, let's face it. I think he's maybe not the hottest seat in right now, but if things go awry this season, that seat's going to warm up rather quickly. So yeah, a good start, hopefully for them to get out of the gate. And then, like you said, the Jaguars are really interesting because we know they kind of revamped the offense, brought in Liam Cohen. We know they have Travis Hunter, but then that stretch at Minnesota, at Denver versus Detroit, at Green Bay versus Pittsburgh, that and Pittsburgh being on a short week, traveling back from Lambeau, that's tough. That's very tough. Then at least you have the Jets and Bears at home, but I mean the Bears are another fascinating team, and then they go to Pittsburgh again after their bye week. So yeah, like you said, they have a tough schedule. And that's with not even seeing Baltimore.
And they're going to see Baltimore, Buffalo, Baltimore in 3 consecutive
weeks. Yep.
That's crazy.
So at least they have a mini bye coming off the first Baltimore game because that's a Thursday. But still, they did not get themselves any favors at all.
So what are reasonable expectations for this year? How do you see this Bengals team shaping up in terms of performance? What do you think their floor and what do you think their ceiling is?
Well, given how good the offense is, it almost feels like it could be another year of like last year. You score 30, 35 points and you're going to be in some shootouts. So I think the floor is probably about 9-8 again, because Joe Burrow is just so good that he's going to win some games on his own. I think if things break their way, maybe you get to 11, 12 wins. Maybe you're competing for a division title. Maybe if you're lucky, a higher seed in the playoffs. But I think the goal at least is, at least just competing in the North. Maybe you steal some games because, you do have definitely some winnable home games with the Jets coming to town, the Patriots coming to town. You close with the Browns week 18. Maybe you steal some of those division games too, if you're lucky. So I feel like 9-12, because even with the lack of pass rush, we saw they still found a way to get to 9 wins last season, even with nobody besides Hendrickson getting, at least finishing the job, sacking the quarterback. So 9 wins feels like kind of the floor for this team and competing for a wild card. Best case scenario, somebody steps up. They get Shamar Stewart under contract. They figure it out with Trey Hendrickson. The secondary takes a step forward. The defense improves. And you get to, like I said, 11, 12 wins, and you're right there with the Ravens and Steelers, maybe even just, depending how you feel the Steelers, but certainly at least the Ravens in competing for the division. So that feels kind of about the range right now for me. It's about 9 to 12 wins, depending on how some things shape up.
And then they face the Cardinals at home in Week 17.
Mm-hmm.
How are the Cardinals viewed on their schedule? Is that a game where that's definitely should win, toss-up or potential loss if you're looking at the Cardinals that late in the season?
I would say certainly a toss-up, because I really like what the Cardinals did this offseason in, just building more on the offense and helping Kyler, but certainly the defensive line. Obviously, I love, because I think Walter Nolan definitely would have been an option for the Bengals at 17 if the Cardinals didn't take him at 16. So I really love that pick for the Cardinals. I'm fascinated. Again, this was a team, like you said, and obviously listeners here know this. It was very up and down, and they still found a way to get to 8 wins. So I really like the direction the Cardinals are going. So this is absolutely not a cakewalk, even that late in the season. I mean, I expect the Cardinals to be in playoff contention. So if they are, if I'm right, then that game is going to be just as huge for the Cardinals as it will be for the Bengals. So that could quietly be one of the better Week 17 games this season. That's going to be really fun to watch. And then, how that defense stops Kyler Murray and stops that rushing game, which, to me, a lot of people sometimes forget they had a really good running game last year. So really going to be excited to follow the Cardinals this season.
And how do you think? So what do you predict will be the Bengals? So you just gave us their floor, their ceiling. What do you think will ultimately be their record this year? Will they make the playoffs, and what will be their record? And how deep will they make it in the playoffs if they do?
I'm going to say 10-7. They get a wild card, because I do think the Ravens are going to win the division. But I think the Bengals get a wild card with 10 wins. I think they could steal one in the wild card round with that offense with Joe Burrow. And then, then that maybe sets them up to have to go to a Buffalo or a Kansas City in the divisional round. And I'm going to say that's where, even if the defense improves a little bit, I think you get to teams like that, they're going to start carving up that defense a little bit. So I could see them winning a playoff game. And then it brings up an interesting discussion on what happens with Zach Taylor, because even a season like that still doesn't feel like that's the expectation now for Bengals fans. That's probably still going to feel like a little bit of a failure. So then it's a matter of, okay, is Zach Taylor then the guy to get us back to where we want to be? Because it's crazy to think it's only been a couple of years since they've been to the Super Bowl, but it feels so far away. 4 years is a long time, but it's not that long. But sometimes in the NFL, it's a long time. So that's going to be a fascinating discussion if it gets to that point. But yeah, I'm going to say 10 wins, and I'm going to say they win a playoff game.
That sounds fun. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise of Sierra podcast of SR Cardinals Talk. And the way we've been talking to Billy Riccette, you can find his work a few places. He's one of the contributing writers over at the Bengals Wire. You can find his coverage of the Jets at the Jets Wire. And you also do a little work for Jeff Risdon over on the Lions.
Yes, sir. Yep.
So he's got a lot of hats. You can find him on X/Twitter. I'll always call it Twitter at Billy_Riccette. That's 2 C's and 2 T's and 2 E's.
That's right.
One before and after each of the 2 T's. So Billy Riccette. Billy, thanks for coming on again this year, man. I appreciate it. I love talking ball. I love doing these shows. My co-host is fantastic. I love doing the shows with him, but this is something different, especially the guys around on the network that, we get a little bit of interaction on Slack, but this is a little bit more fun, I think.
Oh, absolutely it is. A lot better than Slack for sure. We're able to just talk a lot smoother. It's a lot of fun, do this face to face. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, man. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks so much, Billy. That will wrap this show. We have one more opponent. This wraps up the opponent preview series. And next show that you will get we'll have Seth and me back as we will preview training camp. So that wraps up this series of the opponent previews as the Bengals are the Cardinals' 14th and final different opponent. The Cardinals play the Rams in Week 18, but you already heard the Rams preview. So that wraps up this series. Seth and I will be back soon as we will we'll preview the Cardinals and training camp. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.